Good evening, and welcome to the first Japan-Brazil panel of the year. This event is organized by the Japan House São Paulo and the School of International Relations at Fundação Getúlio Vargas to discuss some of the main matters in the international agenda, bringing together specialists from both countries. Tonight, the topic of discussion is climate change through the lenses of global governance and international relations. We're delighted to introduce our panelists who kindly accepted our invitation to share their extensive experience on the subject with us. Mrs. Yukari Takamura is a professor at the Institute for Future Initiatives at the University of Tokyo, and she joins us from Japan. And Mr. Eduardo Viola is professor at the Institute of International Relations at the University of Brasília. It is part of our protocol to highlight that all statements expressed during this event exclusively represent personal opinion and not necessarily FGV's institutional position. Also, all present here agreed to participate and have consented to be recorded on this broadcast, which will be later posted on FGV's official channels. The audience can send us questions during the entire event through the Slido platform. You can access it in the event description. After the expositions, we have a few minutes to discuss and answer the questions. Unfortunately, Professor Dr. Pedro Brites, coordinator of this project, was unable to join us tonight due to some technical issues, but I will represent him as best as possible. To kickstart our panel, I'll give the floor to Professor Takamura from the University of Tokyo. Her research focuses on legal and governance issues related to multilateral environmental agreements, as well as regulation and politics of climate and energy. She has served as one of 10 experts in the meeting established under the Prime Minister to develop a Japanese long-term strategy for decarbonization, which was approved by the Cabinet and submitted to the United Nations in 2019. In addition to the long-time collaboration with the United Nations Environmental Program, she serves as a member of the Advisory Group on Climate Change and Sustainable Development at the Asian Development Bank. Thank you very much, and it is our pleasure, Professor Takamura.
Thank you, Luana. It's a great pleasure of me to join in this Japan-Brazil panel organized of the School of the International Relations and FGV. So I think I tried to share the slides. Just a minute. I hope you can see this slide. Okay. So
the screen is dark now.
Oh, really?
Seeing it before.
It's not really work then? Sorry, I tried to then again.
Yes.
How is it's coming?
We can see it. Yes.
You can see? Okay. Thank you. So this time I'm going to talk about the climate change policy after the Paris Agreement. I think I was told that the most of the students have the basic knowledge about the climate change policy, but I think I like to then focus on the what is recent development in the climate change policy after the Paris Agreement. So, but still, maybe it is better to review the development of the history of international climate policy. As you know, that after establishment of the International Governmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, which are a scientific body to feed the climate-related knowledge into the policy process. So the first convention was adopted in 1992, as you know that in just after the Rio summit, held in the Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The first convention is United Nations Framework Convention, Climate Change. And then after the second assessment report of IPCC, we had the Kyoto Protocol adopted in 1997. That is the second international treaty. And then the things evolved. Finally, we had the Paris Agreement in 2015. Then that is the three convention treaties directly related to the climate change. So I think that the Kyoto Protocol is quite well known. It provides for the quantified emission target for developed countries, and it provides for also the market mechanism called the Kyoto mechanism. Maybe you might know that Clean Development Mechanism, CDM. So this Kyoto Protocol actually was evolved into the 2015 Paris Agreement. So now we count for the 189 countries, including United States, and the EU ratified. So what is the main feature of the Paris Agreement? Main feature, of course, it's a 29 article. It was the Paris Agreement is composed of 29 articles. But I just show you here that the several points. But since due to time constraint, I like to focus especially 2 points. First main feature is that the Paris Agreement provides for clear long-term goal for decarbonization. Article 2.1 provide that the holding the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees and pursuing effort to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial level. This scale of and the speed of decarbonization correspond to the net zero emission or decarbonization in the second half of this century, based on the most recent scientific knowledge that if we wish to achieve 1.5 degree target under the Paris Agreement, we need to reduce our emission to zero by 2050. In order to achieve such a long-term goal for decarbonization under the Paris Agreement, Paris Agreement actually design some of the institutional device. One is the mitigation commitment, reduction commitment for all countries, but this target is set by a voluntary basis. So each country prepare and submit its own target internationally and explain what is the reason why that they put this kind of target. This is the current and nationally determined contribution, that is a current national target. But I think some of country and the region has already announced that they updated. For instance, I think the EU and China is already submitted a new updated NDC. It's the national target. But I think I know that Brazil is one of that listed here. But I think one of the issue is related to the Paris Agreement is that even though the country implemented perfectly its own target, the accumulated level of reduction were not to achieve the long-term goal. We have a large gap between our current level of action, climate action, and target, and long-term goal pathway toward long-term goal, such as a 1.5 and well below 2 degree target. So to tackle this, effectiveness problem, the Paris Agreement provide for the 5 years cycled ratchet up mechanism. Every 5 years, each country have to submit its own target, hopefully updated and raise the level of emission. So every 5 years, this kind of ratchet up happen. Then hopefully we could achieve the long-term goal for decarbonization under the Paris Agreement. So I think I'm going to share my slide after the presentation of this event, so that through this, the School of International Relations. But that is some kind of comparison between the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. I think you can see that, of course, both are legally binding, but for instance, the coverage of reduction commitment taker are different, as I said. And also nature of commitment and target setting approaches are, quite different. So I move on to the, second topic, second, the point that I like to say is that this clear long-term goal provided for or in the Paris Agreement had quite a significant impact of the all international regime, because that's provide a guidance for each country's policy direction. You might know that Japan is the one country that announced that they wish to achieve the net zero emission by 2050. So we now count the more than 120 countries plus European Union join in this kind of 25 decarbonization goal. And in addition to such a national commitment or national goal, this long-term goal under the Paris Agreement provide a guidance for other international regimes. Maybe some scholars say that it's kind of orchestration in global climate governance. For instance, you can see that International Civil Aviation Organization called ICAO, now they are preparing for taking the action in corresponding to the decarbonization goal under the Paris Agreement. And also the same for the International Maritime Organization and the Montreal Protocol to tackle the ozone depleting ozone layer is also tackling or strengthening the action, especially towards the hydrofluorocarbon, which is one of the potent greenhouse gases. As I already said, that Japan announced that its own goal to achieve the net zero emission by 2050. It was happened last October by the Prime Minister in the Prime Minister's announcement on the first his policy speech. But as I said, that it's not only Japan but also the more than 120 countries are joining. And I think it's getting some kind of de facto international goal or in terms of the climate change. Maybe you can see a little bit more detail here. The climate policy by some countries. EU, as I said, that already they have a target, a long-term goal of the climate neutrality by 2050. They already updated its 2030 national target from at least 40% below 1990 to the 55% below 1990. UK is quite same, but its target is now 2030 target is now the 68 reduction target, by 2030. US, the Biden administration started quite an aggressive climate policy. They already announced a net zero emission by 2050 and also carbon-free electricity by 2030, with $2 trillion of investment in the infrastructure, especially in green energy. And China as well, and China is now the world first country in terms of renewable. But they already announced that the peak in emission before 2030 and toward achieving carbon neutrality before 2060. So you can see that the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement actually inform these countries to, formulate and implement climate policy in its own jurisdiction. So why such kind of move happening? I think maybe the driving force is that unfortunately climate-related disaster have seen increasing. So actually in Japan it's caused gigantic economic loss already. For instance, the more than 1 trillion yen of payment has been done respectively 2018 and 2019 by Japanese insurance companies due to the climate-related disasters. And also local authorities are moving toward the carbon neutrality by 2050. I think just to show some kind of climate-related disaster in Japan, it's a table of the showing that how much gigantic the economic loss due to climate disaster. Maybe I'd like to highlight that the second driving force is actually coming from business sector. Here I put some example, but the Japan Association of the Corporate Executive asked the government to take policy to increase the renewable share up to 40%. Currently, actually, around the 20%, and it's a doubling target by 2030. As I think I show that the reason why the business are actually moving toward maybe the very, very fast, even compared to the government. The example of the active climate action on the part of business is here under the initiative of Science-Based Targets Initiative. It is a global initiative. This initiative is actually certified the companies with the Paris Agreement, consistent goal. That means that they certify companies of its goal or in which of goal is in line with the level of decarbonization goal under the Paris Agreement. Now we count for the more than 1,200. This is a list of Japanese company already committed. You can see that quite some company name, Japanese company names might be familiar with you, like a Sony and Panasonic, and you can see that the list of representative, the Japanese representative companies here. Also the Toyota and some big, the oil and electricity company is also joining to this carbon neutrality by 2050. One of the most important tool to achieve it is renewable energy. So this is an initiative coming from the business sector as well as a Renewable 100 initiative. Big global company is now joining to this initiative, including the 50 Japanese company. Again, like Sony and Asahi and many Japanese, quite a well-known global corporation is joining to do their business with the 100% renewable electricity. Why this move coming is one great reason is this pressure coming from the supply chain. I pick up one example from the big IT platform company, Microsoft. Microsoft just announced that the climate moonshot initiative last year. Of course, their action is quite ambitious, but I just highlight here that they already almost, decarbonize their businesses, especially by using renewable energy. But now their focus move on to the emission from the supply chain. So, for instance, example of the Microsoft show that the Microsoft wish to reduce Scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emission means that the emission from its supply chain, supply chain of the Microsoft. For instance, if Microsoft wish to do their business with other companies, partners, they wish to reduce emission from these partner companies. So they have a clear target that they reduce the emission of partner company by more than half by 2030. For doing so, they start this year new procurement processes and to enable, incentivize its supplier of Microsoft to reduce their emissions. So the same happened with Apple. Apple wished to, do their business all over the business by renewable energy. So they request the supplier of Apple to do their business by renewable 100. So the last point that I like to highlight is that the driver for the change in the business behavior come from financial institutions. Now the investors and financial institutions request the company to disclose climate-related risk covering the whole supply chain of companies. And based on this information, they invest according to the ESG factors, often called ESG investment. E is environment, S as social, and G as corporate governance. So based on this information related to ESG, the investor actively invest in these companies which are strong with these ESG factors. So the amount of investment is increasing very quickly. And, they actually engage company to do the ESG activities, especially focusing on climate change. So they convince the company to do more aggressive action in their business, especially in relation to the climate change. So the Sony now, I think the Japanese company is quite vulnerable in that sense because in our jurisdiction we have sometimes difficulty in procuring the renewable energy. Sometimes high, sometimes we lack volume. So the Sony actually, somehow announced that if they could not procure renewable more easily, they maybe have to go out from Japan because many supplier or many partner company was working with Sony, request Sony to decarbonize and do business with the renewable. If they couldn't, they lose a business opportunity, with this business partner. Japan is one of the countries which have a risk facing such situation after the United States. So the reason why is that Japan is one of the countries with the highest emission intensity in terms of electricity. So that's how to decarbonize our electricity or power system is one of the very important factor to improve the competitiveness of Japanese the companies. So to end, I think I like to finish. Maybe I could wrap up here. Now we see some changing approach in global climate governance because even compared to the Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement presents a long-term goal, clear long-term goal, vision for the future society, decarbonized society, because that's the facilitate the understanding of the scale of problem, climate change, and identify challenges. That is not only for government, but also the international, the global, other global institutions, and also the private sector. because the tackling climate change needs action and investment on the part of private sector, then how to incentivize innovation, investment, action by state, not only state, by non-state actors. So for doing so, under the Paris Agreement, not only the country taking the action, but also the country, they try to internalize and the mainstream climate-related risk consideration in business strategy itself and this business decision-making through climate-related financial disclosure and impacted by investors. And one of the big incentive come from supply chain because the supplier wish to change its supplier's behavior. I mean, business wish to change its supplier's behavior, and then the company have to change its behavior to tackle climate change. This kind of approach is actually spread into other issues than climate change. For instance, the big pension fund of Norwegian government started to integrate plastic issue into the investment policy. And also United Nations implement a program and others, UN and investors supported by the UK and the Swiss government. Now the nature related financial disclosure on the business, is now working. So this kind of approach is expanding because maybe you can see that investors' concern is now climate change, but now move on the plastic and also circular economy, of course, the diversity and other social issues. Very last, not least, this kind of decarbonization move might have international relations. That's very interesting because Japan and the European Union depend on significantly on the imported fossil fuel. Decarbonization of our energy system rather improve our energy security. And already US and China and also Brazil are quite strong in the energy security. But then maybe their status have not maybe very much affected. But some, the countries depending on export and the fossil fuel might have some difficulty and less hegemony in the international relations. So decarbonization and the energy transition related to this decarbonization might change the landscape of international relations. That's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Takamura, for bringing a perspective from a developed nation as well as for introducing the private sector to the discussion. Once again, we encourage the public to send us questions to the Slido platform. Now, to contribute with a certain point of view, we invite Professor Dr. Viola from the University of Brasília to the floor. He is a senior research fellow at the Institute of Advanced Studies at the University of São Paulo, as well as the chair of the Brazilian Research Network on the International System in the Anthropocene and Climate Change. He has published several books and more than 80 articles on issues of globalization and governance, democratization in South America, environmental policy in Brazil, and global and South American politics of climate change. Professor Viola has been a consultant with the Brazilian Ministries of Science and Technology, Education, Strategic Matters, Defense and Environment, and as well as several philanthropic organizations, international agencies, and private corporations. He has been a member of the Scientific Steering Committee of the Human Dimension and Global Environment Change Program in Bonn, Germany, and the Committee on Global Environmental Change in the Brazilian Academy of Science. Professor, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate very much the invitation by the Fundación Getúlio Vargas to speak tonight. I appreciate very much to be with Professor Takamura, that the presentation was excellent. My presentation will be complementary to her presentation. I have two parts in my presentation. The first part has 3 points, and the second part 6 points. So, starting with the first point, I consider that humanity has failed so far in building up collective action for mitigating climate change. Why? Because since the Rio Convention in 1992 and the Kyoto Protocol, the carbon emissions have been increasing continuously, except in last year or the year of 2009 because of the economic crisis. But otherwise, continuous growing in carbon emissions. And actually, carbon emissions in the first decade of the 21st century were higher than in the 90s, that were the period in which we have 3 important conferences, Rio, Kyoto, and Copenhagen. Because of this, this failure don't necessarily implies that we will continue failing, but the effort that will be needed for success is right now much more, need to be more deep, more intense, okay? And so it's open-ended what will happen. Second point, the Paris Agreement. My assessment of the Paris Agreement, that is, there are a lot of people that think that like me, is that was a great diplomatic achievement, but was poor from a substantial point of view of climate change mitigation. But of course, better the Paris Agreement than nothing, okay? So why was the great diplomatic achievement? Because it was a really very complex negotiation to have the support of all the members of the United Nations. Because it was a very, very complex negotiation. And for sure, it was very important the leadership of the European Union, the French government, the American government, British government, Japanese government, okay? There were many governments that contributed to the great achievement. But the substantial is a kind of reduction of ambition compared with the ambition in Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, the model was that there will be a negotiation based in rationality, let's say, for goals of reduction emissions from all countries, okay? But this failed, okay? There was just the countries defined their commitments in the Copenhagen agreement, signed, finished 3 months after the conference of Copenhagen. So what was expected before the failure of Copenhagen was a negotiation like in Kyoto, but with more ambitious goals for developed countries and with more with goals also for developing countries, particularly middle-income countries. Okay, so not necessarily reduction of emissions, but at least reduction of the curve business as usual. Okay, so and this didn't happen. And this was again in Paris. Each country say what would compromise, but it's not legally binding the quantitative goals of the countries. Okay, it's voluntary. So it's very weak from a legal point of view. Even Kyoto Protocol, that was stronger in relation to developed countries, didn't have teeth. Okay, for example, Canada withdrew from the protocol in 2011 and didn't suffer any punishment. Okay, so this show, but what happened? The Paris Agreement was the best you can have at that moment. Okay, so this is also very clear. Since the Paris Agreement, most countries are not in track for fulfillment the goals that they themselves defined. For example, the goals for 2020. So there is always, this is a problem of the agreements. You have sometimes you have long-term goals, but the short-term or middle-term goals are really poor. For example, this whole wave of commitment, for example, China carbon neutral in 2050. Okay, but if you look at the dynamic of the Chinese economy, this is not feasible. Okay, so third point, the governance of the climate is driven by two major players. From one side, the most powerful countries. From the other side, the major global corporations. Okay. From the point of view of the countries, the most powerful are there are two powers for climate change: a constructive power and a destructive power. A destructive power is the amount of emissions that you generate. The constructive power is the effort to mitigate your emissions and be cooperative in the world arena for reducing global emission, mitigating global climate change. Okay, so what are the countries that are the powerful in the area of climate? That is not the same that the area of security, for example, okay, or even economics. Okay, so they are United States, the European Union, China, Japan, United Kingdom, India, Russia, Brazil, and Indonesia. Okay. Beyond that, other countries that are relevant are also the other G20 countries, and what we name right now the countries that are not in the G20 but are growing emissions, economy, and population very fast, being Nigeria, Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Vietnam. They are not members of the G20. So the recent trajectory from these powerful countries, we can group in two groups. Relatively good, not very good, but there is no very good. The best is the United Kingdom, of course, as Professor Takamura showed even in the proposal of the commitment for 2030. Second best is the European Union, but there is a major difference in the European Union between the northern countries and northern countries that are very committed, and southern countries and eastern countries that are some of them not committed, like Poland, for example. Japan is also having a good trajectory, not good, relatively good. And United States also. For example, even the trend of reducing emissions of United States started in 2009 and continues until today. Even with the Trump administration, the reduction continues, but in a more slow pace. There was just 1 year in which emissions stagnated, were not reduced during the Trump administration. That was 2019. And the countries with bad recent trajectory are China, that is in itself spending the whole carbon budget of the planet, okay? India, Russia, that is an exporter of fossil fuels, Brazil, that I will talk again afterwards, but in the last, since 2015, has been increasing emissions significantly, and particularly in the last 2 years, and Indonesia, okay? Well, in relation to corporations, to what is very, very relevant is something that has already mentioned by Professor Takamura, that is that in the last 2-3 years, there has been a shift in most global corporations in the Western world. Not only Western political, not geographical, meaning United States, Canada, Europe, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Australia, okay? And so the idea, they internalized climate risk in their decision making and planning. And the same happened with major investment funds and pension funds in the world. They invest in corporations that have carbon-stranded assets. Fourth point, trajectory of emissions in Brazil. 4 periods. 1990, 2004, very negative. 2005 to 2012, amazingly positive. Reduction of emission of 70%, okay? But because the previous period was extremely irrational, the most irrational likely in world history, because it was coming from deforestation in the Amazon. Not like producing jobs and GDP like the thermal power in China, things like this. 2013, 2014, a period of stagnation, and 2015, 2020, negative again, very negative the last 2 years. Fifth point, Brazil, this is all the next points are related to the role of Brazil in global climate governance. So there is a period of relatively constructive approach to global climate governance that goes from 1990 to 2002. But relatively, because there is a major gap between discourse and behavior. So the standing position in the climate, in the international negotiation is positive, but the trajectory of emissions is very negative. Okay, so the credibility of Brazil is very low, and is considered a kind of villain of global climate, of global environment in this period. The other thing that is a problem from Brazil from this point of view was to have a radical interpretation of the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, according to which only developed country has targets for reducing emission, not middle-income countries, and even not in a more soft way, like, for example, reducing the trajectory of the emissions curve. Okay, and the other caveat in relation to this relative constructive role is that Brazil, in the negotiation of Kyoto, was opposed to including the emissions coming from forest in the protocol. It was partially defeated, okay? Well, 6th point, Brazil has a very constructive approach to global climate governance in the period 2008 to 2010, okay? For example, Brazil was the only non-Annex 1 country that had quantity goals for the Conference of Copenhagen, though they were very, tricky, because it was based in the deforestation, in the reduction of deforestation that was already going on. So it was something that was easy. Okay, so this is a caveat, and there were positions amazing, like the discourse of Lula in Copenhagen, saying that that not just developed countries should support financially poor countries, but also middle-income countries like Brazil should support poor countries. This was something an outlier position of Brazil. It was not at all supported by the Itamaraty, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It's important to consider that this process of dramatic reduction of emission was the most important factor. Probably was the strong leadership of Minister of the Environment and environmentalist Marina Silva. Okay. That Lula supported in 2004. Okay, 7th point. Brazil had a very constructive role at Paris, not immediately before, but for reason very complex to explain right now, the president decided, Dilma Rousseff, because he was threatened by impeachment, to have more prestige internationally, and accepted more ambitious commitments that were absolute commitments, not anymore relative to, to business as usual, but absolute commitment. Generally, the Minister of the Environment in the COPs between 2014 and 18 have progressive positions. The 8th point, Brazil has a very negative role in global climate governance since 2019. Became an ally of the more Trump administration, Saudi Arabia, and even having a president that denied the existence of climate change, though even threatened to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, but finally didn't withdraw because there was a lot of opposition. Okay, so future perspective, 9th point, the last one. I think I am skeptical about the possibility of a significant change in the international and domestic environmental policy of the Bolsonaro administration. The core of Bolsonaro is denial of climate change, is committed to conspiracy theories, committed to frequent lies in the public arena. So there will be, the European Union is pressuring since 2019, the Bolsonaro administration. And now we will have some pressure of the Biden administration. By that, so the Biden administration will not, in my view, confront the Bolsonaro administration, but they will engage the subnational governments of Brazil in relation to climate change, and the civil society and ONGs and social movements. Okay, so this could be very effective, but at the same time not confronting the government, the federal government, because for the United States it's key Brazil to keep us an ally with the United States. Okay, and otherwise with the increasing influence of China in South America and in Argentina particularly, for the Biden administration and the U.S. national interest is key not to avoid pushing Brazil toward China. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Viola. It is a huge opportunity to be able to hear from you, as well as Professor Takamura. We don't have much time left, so I will take one question, and we would like, if possible, to hear from both of you professors. The question is, Brazil and Japan have received the Fossil Award in COP25 and have been evaluated as reluctant to engage in environmental policy and climate change negotiations. In what aspects of climate change governance can Brazil and Japan work together? And in addition, how can the Japanese government promote renewable energy projects such as wind and solar power in Brazil for the business sector? Is it okay?
Yes. So I tackle first, and I give the baton to the Professor Viola, I think, to wrap up. So thank you very much. Especially Professor Viola, I got a lot of knowledge about how the Brazilian position in the international climate governance developed. So it's quite I had quite a clear view on that. Thank you very much. So in the response to the question posed by the audience, I think the Luana presented, it's quite a lot of issues, I think. But I think yes, it is true that at COP25, Japan, I didn't know that Brazil also, but Japan had actually awarded as a fossil fuel award by the civil society. I think mainly because of the coal-fired plant policy, domestic, in Japan, and overseas assistance. So that's actually quite changed last year in terms of Japan, because the Japanese government changed its direction in terms of the overseas assistance in the energy sector. So that not unfortunately, maybe not for the project coal-fired plant in the pipeline. Which was already decided there to give some assistance, but I think that practically speaking, no new construction project of coal-fired plant could not be assisted by Japanese government, because already Japanese business and also bank are getting away from the new coal-fired plant project. The maybe more important, challenge for us is that how to reduce domestic dependency on the coal-fired plant in our power sector. We are now considering how to strengthen the measure. Also how to raise our level of ambition. Level of reduction toward 2030. I hope that some more aggressive action to reduce dependency on the coal-fired plants domestically. I think that's kind of action hopefully come from these deliberation currently ongoing. The second point that I like to say that what is the possibility of for the collaboration between the Japan and Brazil, and especially maybe the renewable. I think now I understand that already now the Japanese business sector go to Brazil and also to invest in the renewable energy project. I think it's a private partnership and collaboration is ongoing, and I hope that in light of the increasing energy, clean energy shift in the global market, I think this kind of trend will be strengthening. Also, I know that Brazil, actually the benefit how to say it, Brazil have quite a plenty of the potential of renewable domestically, so that's I think this is clearly the one of the area for the collaboration between the two governments, I hope. And as Professor Viola mentioned, that maybe not only between the national government, but also between the subnational government and Japanese government and the corporation companies. How to then very briefly how to increase our renewable portfolio domestically in Japan is we have now the feed-in tariff scheme, and to move to evolve into the feed-in premium, some kind of assisting renewable introduction in our power system is now on, but I think the more aggressive action by company actually supported this trend, and hopefully this we could increase the share of renewable toward 2030 and then 2050. I hope I answer almost all questions, but I think the Professor Viola could they assist me to respond into these questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Takamura. We are heading to the end of our event. We will now listen to Professor Eduardo Viola, and then I will present the closing remarks. Professor Viola, your mic isn't on.
I agree with you, Professor Takamura. And if we the Brazil winning the prize of fossil of the year, I mean, it's very easy considering what is the position of the Bolsonaro administration in the international conferences. Okay, but it's something relevant to consider is the following: the dynamic in the Amazon is very negative. The discourse of Bolsonaro since the electoral campaign has been in favor of supporting illegal mining, illegal timber industry, illegal deforestation. There is a lot of, here we have very backward landowners combined with organized crime. This is what happened in the Amazon. But this is a base, electoral base of Bolsonaro, okay? So the best way to change this is supporting many state and municipal governments in the Amazon that don't share the Bolsonaro position. Some governors share the Bolsonaro position in the Amazon, but others no, okay? And they are in favor of controlling deforestation, but the resources they have are very limited, because generally the resources for control deforestation are federal and from the Minister of the Environment, the national government. So international funding from Japan, from Europe and United States, I recognize this will be not in big scale, because Brazil is a middle income country, not a poor country, and doesn't deserve a major foreign aid, even because we have here a very unequal society, one of the more unequal in the world. In Gini index today is 0.56, and one thing that will be crucial in Brazil for improving the situation in the Amazon, that is one of the poorest regions of the country, would be to have a tax reform that increase taxation in large corporations and rich people. Okay, I mean, there is no reason for developed countries to pay for something that should be done by the Brazilians that are very high income, very high assets. Okay, and so the other thing that I would like to add is that, I don't know, Professor Takamura, how is Japan going in the direction of mixing ethanol with gasoline? And because this would be a possibility. Brazil is a very competitive producer of ethanol from sugarcane. It's not true that producing more ethanol will increase deforestation. This is not true. It could, but it's not necessarily happening like this, because there are a lot of lands that are abandoned outside the Amazon. Okay, and so if Japan is moving in that direction, I don't know, because more recently there has been major automobile corporations have decided to abandon the combustion engine and move to electric cars, and so maybe the life of ethanol will be a transitional life, not very long. I mean, unfortunately for Brazil, though, what is important is that Brazil could produce significant amounts of green hydrogen that the Europeans are very interested right now. Okay, so this would be another possibility of exportation to Japan.
Maybe just quickly, is it okay, Luana?
Of course, please.
Yeah, I think thank you very much, Professor Viola. I think I clearly forgetted mentioning that. I mean, the biomass-based fuel, like ethanol. I think maybe not directly using the vehicle, but I think still for instance, in Japan, try to find a collaboration with Brazil in the field of material, like some kind of replacing the plastic, oil-based plastic, and also the aviation fuel, because it's not easy to change to power. So that I think that is clearly important area, that the collaboration toward the decarbonization between Brazil and Japan. I think it's really wonderful remarks. I really forget. I'm sorry for that.
Well, unfortunately, our time is up, and now we approach the end of our panel. Once again, we would like to thank both professors for such a unique and informing panel, and I wish our audience a good night.
Thank you very much.